Welcome back to the show. You know, of course, everybody's talking about the election, but since we are a real estate show and finance, we thought we'd stay away from it for at least a little while. Tyler Freed is back with us, a good friend of our show, branch manager down at Windermere Real Estate in Lake Tapps. First of all, welcome back, Tyler. How are you?
I'm doing good. Good to be back.
It's good to see you. You actually had talked about kind of a survey you had put together, I guess kind of like an election. People were voting for things that you could, questions people had.
Right. So I had a couple friends that we were actually flying back from LA this weekend and said, hey, we're going to do the radio this week. What are a couple things that you guys want to know about? If you had to ask any question, what would that be? What would you ask a real estate agent? And they said, could you go over the inspection process with me and then also the financing? So I thought that was really interesting.
The two things that you don't do.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about that. So financing, I told them, the biggest thing is choosing the right loan program for you. And I told them, 9 out of 10 buyers that I work with go FHA. And they're like, well, tell us a little bit more about that. Why FHA? And I go, well, first off, it's the least expensive, 3.5% down. And the rates are the lowest. Rates stayed between 3.25%, 3.5%. And then the debt to income ratio is pretty forgiving there, all the way up to 55%. So those are pretty much big reasons why people like using that program.
It's one of those things that people go into an FHA loan, and because it is the least expensive, at least like you said, it's the least amount down, and it might have lowest interest rates. One of the problems, though, is that it's actually extremely expensive.
Right.
Because you have the highest mortgage insurance, and you have up front as well as monthly.
Yeah.
So you really do have to make sure you understand the difference, which I think is kind of what they're getting at, is because there are so many options. Correct.
And then another thing, if they're buying the condo, then they got to factor in those HOA dues. That's what we've been coming across a lot lately. So
are people not aware of the HOA dues? Are they?
It's crazy because they get so focused on, this place is only $249, $950. I'm like, yeah, that's a steal in Queen Anne, but the dues are going to be $500 a month, so that's really not what you're looking at.
Right.
So.
And then what makes the dues different? Why are condo dues different?
It's a good question. The biggest thing that kind of fluctuate is, you got to keep an eye on how strong the reserves are, because, maybe they've raised the dues for a period of time. Sometimes they'll raise them for about 10 months if they've got a big upcoming assessment. Maybe they need to redo the windows, repaint. We've had a couple balconies that had to be refinished, kind of thing like that. So that can fluctuate there.
And again, I guess in some ways that is why people can go with like an FHA loan, because they keep a little bit more money in their pocket, or even can get a gift.
Yeah, that's another. I think our generation. I think we've talked about this in the past, but our generation, the ones that are working have good, strong monthly income, but they just don't have the savings. I don't know if that's just. My group of friends, or a majority of people, just don't have the savings. So getting that help from the family members is huge for that down payment. And the big key to that is that everything's got to be tracked. We've talked about that in the past, how important it is to see the documentation for these underwriters doing the loan and everything. So everything's got to be triple checked almost. So the money that gets transferred from the parents to the son or daughter, we need to see it coming into the account, and then also the account that it was in needs to be seasoned from the parents and all that stuff.
How do you approach that with, say, a lender? Because, a lot of times it seems like lenders just need paperwork. It just is how it is.
Right.
And how do you help a client understand that, it's going to take a little bit more paperwork?
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. It's just letting them know, hey, this is going to get really annoying after a while because they're going to continuously asking for this. But then again, you got to let them know, hey, everything right now is a result of what it was in the past, right? We've got to make sure we've got all this extra documentation in, because that wasn't happening in the past, and things have changed and banks are tighter, and you just have to expect that. So sometimes these lenders will ask for stuff a couple more times and more explanations and all that stuff. So with that buyer counseling session that we have at the beginning, letting them know that this is definitely going to be coming up, a lot of paperwork to get this to go through.
Do you find that, the paperwork is, we talk a little bit about, in fact, we talked yesterday on the show about, the fact that there's this element of fear that comes into play. They're afraid of the paperwork, afraid of finding out what their credit score is. Do you find that too?
Yeah, I think it's them they fall in love with the place. So especially if they're kind of doing everything backwards, they've been searching online and they see all these places they want. They've kind of got that dollar amount. I think there is a fear that, they won't be able to qualify for that, or the credit's not as strong as possible.
Yeah. So, and that, I guess, is because that kind of can quash the hopes and dreams, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you find another thing? I know we're talking about financing, and I want to get into the inspection piece too. But the closing costs, the element of the cost to buy a home. Do you feel like that's pretty prohibitive?
I think so. Just letting them know that, hey, these homes that are out there, some of them are going to go fast, and those are going to kind of be the untouchables in terms of if you need the closing cost help. So we've kind of got to make sure that the ones we're putting these bids on, if they've just hit the market and it's a multiple offer situation, we're not going to get that closing cost support. And going back to closing costs, those are usually 2 to 2.5% of the purchase price. So, but if you find a home that's been sitting for a little while, there's a good chance you can get all that paid for by the seller. So that's a cost that the buyers aren't going to have to absorb, which is always nice.
We're here with Tyler Freed with Windermere Real Estate in Lake Tapps. Okay, so the financing piece is obviously a big part. I mean, it's something that people are going to potentially have for 30 years in a mortgage. But when you start trying to figure out what house is right for you, I mean, the loan, there's a lot of different selections. But when you start looking at, is the house right? It comes down to sometimes you can fall in love with a house, but maybe it isn't built the way you hope it was.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it is, it kind of goes back to that first session of us meeting. Do you want a new construction home where you're not going to really have to worry about, the electrical and updating all the plumbing, and the fear of how the inspection goes is not coming to play as much? Or, if we're looking in the Seattle area or the Bellevue area with some of these older 1950s, 1940 homes, the inspection is going to play a huge part of this. What's going to come up? Do the sellers have the money to do those repairs and stuff like that?
Does it typically, again, I mean, we start getting into the costs of things because it seems like right now with the amount of inventory that's out there, which is very low, and you have buyers who are maybe, there's a lot to compete on, right? I mean, you might be competing on the inspection and what you're willing to live with. You might be competing on price. You might be competing on closing costs and interest rates. How many of those factors come into play, and does it feel like people need to jump in with both feet rather than trying to learn about every piece?
Yeah, I think getting in there and, like you said, just kind of jumping in with both feet is a good example there. The inspection stuff's going to come up on there, and I always tell people there's probably going to be about 14 to 15 things at least that come up on here. We got to look at the major stuff that comes up and identify what you guys can pay to fix in the future, and then what we can get the sellers to pay for. So if you kind of focus in on those 4 to 5 things, and if for some reason those can't get fixed, maybe you can take a reduction in the purchase price.
How big is an inspection? How big of a piece is that?
Gosh, that's probably the number one contingency for the buyers that they're most concerned about. And, inspections we were talking about earlier usually run about between $275 and about maybe $425 at the max. And they're a huge process, though. Usually, the inspector I use is usually about a 3-hour inspection, and we're going over everything. The inspector's getting on the roof, we're looking at the siding, looking at the plumbing, the electrical panel, and all that different stuff, the appliances, and kind of showing the buyers how the home works and what to keep an eye on, maintenance and stuff like that. And, big things like where's the gas shut off and the water shut off and stuff like that. So they're learning about the home throughout this entire process, too.
There was an element with inspectors and real estate agents that went on previously, kind of before the crash and whatnot about, real estate agents would go and they'd refer an inspector, but they were kind of on the same page in that, everybody wanted the deal to close, and the inspector may not have been all on the up and up and maybe was hiding some things because they don't have a whole lot of recourse. But, sometimes that real estate agent is they were in cahoots, I guess you could say. How would you recommend somebody find the right inspector for them?
Well, I don't think we're seeing that as much in the past now. The inspector that I use, Jay from Four Seasons Inspects, he's actually been on the show in the past. Just a great inspector. Puts the buyers first, and that's kind of the biggest thing there. I mean, we've had to back out of some deals, unfortunately, because of stuff that's come up. But, I mean, I'd rather have them find about it now and, move on to the next home. But going through Yelp reviews and also just searching online and then asking friends and family is a really good way to go.
Yeah. Well, Tyler, always good to see you. Thanks for joining us. And, again, I don't want to get too far into the election, but it's finally people are going to have to make the choices, no matter who people voted for. The election is now over. So if people were waiting for after the election to buy a house, as I said before, they don't have any more time to wait.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out.
All right. Thanks, Tyler. Good to see you, and we will check up with you soon. When we come back, we have a first-time guest. Matthew Matsudaira joins us, CEO and founder, along with Karina Walters with Adori. We'll be right back after this break.